Welcome back to TMH Sportscast. I'm Zach Cohen and Liam Hickey over there, and we're joined by the co-editors of the Miami Hurricane Sports Section, Sebastian and Jayden Gonzalez. Both of you guys, thank you for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for having us on here.
Yeah, thank you for having us,
Now,
man.
Miami finished their regular season 38-7 victory over the Pitt Panthers yesterday. On Tuesday, we saw the College Football Playoff Committee have their conversation, and yet it didn't really favor Miami that much. So we're going to talk about the College Football Playoff outlook today. Liam, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I just want to thank you guys so much for coming on. We really do need to have you guys here because as the two official sports editors for the Miami Hurricane, we could not have had you on at a better time because right now Miami is at the epicenter of the biggest controversy in the sport of college football and arguably the biggest point of contention throughout all sports, bar none right now in America. And it is the conflict of whether Miami deserves a spot in the 12-team college football playoff over Notre Dame, who is currently ranked ahead of them at number 10 for the last at-large spot, despite Miami beating them head-to-head earlier in the season. Now, this is a debate that has ramped up as the biggest topic consuming the nation over the past couple weeks. National media covering it ad nauseum, and you have these news outlets and pundits and analysts pretty much discussing it tirelessly day in and day out. And so the Hurricanes, they've really just kind of soaked the flames here. They fueled the drama even further when they rolled into 30-degree Pittsburgh last Saturday and beat down the Pitt Panthers 38-7, which really turned the tension up another notch and continued to strengthen their case that they do deserve that last spot, now making their side-by-side comparison with Notre Dame almost impossible to ignore now in the head-to-head comparison. So I think it'd be pointless to start the show off and ask you guys, should Miami be in? Because as representatives of the University of Miami, I believe it's unfathomable for all of us to think that they should be out. So I'm going to instead ask you guys, do you think they will be in? So starting off with one of you guys who want to start.
Oh, I'll take it. Personally, I think that they're not going to be put in the sense that the committee has already shown what way they want to go with this. And I think that it's obviously leaning towards an SEC and Notre Dame. That's ratings right there. And I think that people talk about, they're just dragging this out for Miami to eventually flip for ratings. Well, ratings matter in the playoffs, and Alabama and Notre Dame, two of the highest watched programs in the entire country historically and this year. And I think that you've seen Miami creep up, and they keep finding ways to keep that little bubble between Miami and Notre Dame so they're not directly there. And they've changed their stance on it, whether it's if Miami and Notre Dame were 3 spots, I believe, they would respect the head-to-head. They're within 3 spots, hasn't been respected. And I just think that to switch it up at the last hour is something that's going to be really tough for me to see the committee doing.
Unfortunately, I do agree. I don't think Miami will get in, but we have seen the committee at times do this. In 2014, they dropped undefeated TCU over, I believe it was Alabama or one other team like that. And then 2 years ago, obviously with FSU getting dropped, obviously for the Jordan Travis injury. But we've seen the committee at the last hour make the move. Will they do it? I don't know, because you're asking for the committee who for the last 3 weeks, if you wanted to move Miami over name, why not do it now? I feel like if you would have done it weeks ago, you would have done it at some point in time. And the fact that they haven't obviously sets a precedent that they probably won't on Sunday. But there is always a positive, or at least maybe a little bit more of a glimmer of hope, at least what Hunter Yurchek said on Tuesday, where idle teams can move up or down. The fact that Miami's hopes are a little bit open here and there. If BYU were to lose by a lot and drop, and Bama maybe were to win, Miami were to be at 11, Notre Dame at 10. I'm just saying it's a little bit hard to not ignore. It's hard to ignore that. It's hard to ignore seeing Miami at 11, Notre Dame at 10, when on August 31st, Miami obviously beat them.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point that you made, and I know that you guys kind of feel the same way in the sense that it's not just a Miami-Notre Dame battle, right? You're dealing with BYU and Alabama, and I think that you would also have to get over those teams, and last year we saw an SMU team go into the ACC championship, lose that game, and be kind of in that bubble with the other 10-2 teams, and they stayed in the college football playoff. I don't think that they're going to punish teams for playing in championship games unless BYU or Alabama gets absolutely boat raced, has players injured. I really don't think they do that to either of those teams.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Sebastian's first point. I don't think Miami is going to make this college football playoff. I think the committee already has it decided. If you look after the game, or even before the game on Saturday, Nick Saban said Miami could be the most dangerous playoff team. Even the Secretary of State said, Marco Rubio said, put Miami in the college football playoff. But the committee did not budge, and I just don't see them moving. Even Hunter Yurchek said to the media members after the game that pretty much look at what Notre Dame has done. They've won 10 in a row. Miami, they lost those 2 games in the middle of the season. I feel like that's gonna come back to bite them, and it is currently biting them right now.
And so just to set the stage of where it stands right now, BYU currently in the 11th spot. They are right now, I believe, 11-1 on the season, only 1 loss now. It's to Texas Tech. Miami is right behind them, so BYU is kind of serving as that blockade in between the ability to compare Notre Dame and Miami side by side. Alabama, luckily though, if there is a positive takeaway from the ranking review last night, they moved ahead of Notre Dame to the 9 slot after being in 10 last week, which does make the comparison now a little bit closer. Alabama, I believe, in my opinion, always deserved to be in front of Notre Dame. And although the reasoning that Yurchek gave last night was really flawed, something about like how the run game looked better against Auburn, and they were up 17-0 or something in the first quarter, ignoring the fact that Auburn came back. I still believe that the overall line of thinking that Alabama is a better team is correct, but nonetheless, BYU is currently separating the 2 teams. And so going into this Saturday conference championship weekend, do you think that BYU, it's obvious that they need to lose for Miami to have a chance. If BYU wins, both teams will be out almost undoubtedly because Texas Tech is going to still stay in it. And so that means that 2 Big 12 teams will go in, and Notre Dame and Miami will both be on the outside as the final rankings are made. So if BYU does lose, however, do you guys think that they will need to be absolutely steamrolled like they were in the first game against Texas Tech? Or will Miami still have a chance even if they just lose by a single score? Because right now the line is set at, I believe, minus 12.5 for Texas Tech. So that's been the debate, because some people say Texas Tech needs to win convincingly for BYU to drop behind Miami. I think that the way that it was phrased by Yurchek, it seems that if BYU drops to the same record as Miami, if you look at them side by side, BYU's non-conference schedule this season, Portland State, East Carolina, and Stanford. And by the way, Miami has a bigger margin of victory against Stanford than BYU did earlier in the season. I think that even with just a loss, even if it's close to Texas Tech, that should be enough to vault Miami ahead of BYU. But what do you guys think?
I think if you're a Miami fan, you absolutely should be rooting for. I think you should be rooting for Bama to win, so the top 9 stays as is, and then for BYU to lose. I would say at least by 2 scores to make it. If Texas Tech were to cover that game, BYU doesn't cover. I could imagine BYU maybe dropping that spot, and then the committee having no choice but to look at Notre Dame and Miami, and that is your best case scenario for a Miami fan, even in the event that they might not get in. And we're seeing media members all across the country saying, watch out if that were to happen. If that does happen, I do think that would be the best possible scenario, but I think BYU's got to lose by at least 2 scores.
I mean, I think that BYU already pretty much got boat raced earlier in the year by Texas Tech. I find it hard to see that happening again, especially they're in a must-perform situation, 1, and 2, they just re-signed their head coach. I know Texas Tech did the same, but with BYU, he was rumored to go to Penn State. That's a really big win for them to retain him, and I think that with the line being set at, what you said, 12.5?
I believe 12.5.
Yeah.
I think that if they keep that, whether it could even be by 2 touchdowns, if it's still like a competitive battle throughout, if it's 12-14, I still think that they keep them there to kind of set that precedent that you can't be punished for championship games. And I don't know about you guys, but you guys want to talk about how the rankings themselves, not just the ones on the bubble, but the ones in the middle, have kind of caused this with kind of that glut of SEC teams, right? Whether it's Ole Miss, Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma's been a really big problem in this college football discussion that's not really talked about enough, because it's obviously Miami, Notre Dame, Alabama taking the headlines, but Oklahoma is a really bad football team. I mean, if you watch that game against LSU, it felt like you were watching a high school game, right? I mean, I like Mateer, but that offense is just lethargic. It does not belong in a top 12 discussion. I think that's what you see with a lot of these teams. It's that they're not really national championship material, but because they picked up a lot of wins early in the year, they're there, right? And that's a problem with the ranking system. When you look at like Alabama's or ranked wins, whether it's Missouri, Tennessee, those 2 ranked SEC sides played absolutely no one to get ranked. No one. And they're getting rewarded for a ranked win without the context of that team really not being a ranked team. and people in the ACC actually being punished for, let's say, we're playing Pitt, when in reality, I think Pitt can go in there and beat Auburn, right? You saw them beat a Georgia Tech team handedly that had a very competitive game against Georgia, which I believe is a national championship level side. That's a team that I could see winning it. And I think that that's a big problem with the rankings. You have a lot of just mistakes throughout that snowball into this issue we're having.
And that seems to be the problem with Miami, with as you say, because Miami's 2 losses, Louisville and SMU. The rest of college football, or whoever you want to talk to, are going to call them really bad losses. But Louisville last week just absolutely boat raced their rival Kentucky, a team that struggled with Texas. Kentucky's not a good team, objectively not a good team. If you put Louisville in the SEC, I think they hold their own. You put SMU in the SEC, they hold their own. It comes back to that kind of SEC bias, if you wanna call it that, where you're kind of seeing, and they're using pre-AP poll rankings from the preseason, where they're kind of keeping these teams up despite where they really are. Like a team like, Oregon's getting a lot of credit for their win over Penn State, which I think probably should be, but there has to be some consistency within everything, within head-to-head, within what games you're counting over others. The whole point of this, the whole system that they have right now seems to be lacking any sort of consistency, that you can't really predict kind of all this stuff. Like with Alabama, I think they should have been higher than Notre Dame weeks ago, and they kind of course-corrected on Tuesday, and they did an awful reason, as you said, Liam, like for their reason to be that they were competitive, that they beat Auburn, a bad Auburn team, is not a good enough reason. Just say that you messed up, or just say that, hey, we had Miami at 18, and that was a really low spot, and now we're kind of course-correcting. There needs to be some consistency, and there needs to be more transparency within the College Football Playoff Committee right now.
Yeah, this is year 2 of the College Football Playoff in the 12-team setup, and it is by far the hardest configuration that this College Football Playoff Committee has had to deal with since its inception in 2024. And like you said, the committee has had no consistency whatsoever, and that has been the common complaint by Miami Hurricanes fans, is that they've been seemingly moving the goalposts on their requirements and their procedures pretty much this whole time. It's actually been said in their committee protocol that the number one criteria when the records are the same and there are comparable results is head-to-head. And they've completely ignored that now. At first, we had the argument that, they have to be in the same cluster of 4 teams for the head-to-head to come to factor in. And now it's, they have to be literally side-by-side in the rankings. So, yeah, the committee really needs to find some common ground here, because in this group of so-called football experts, it does not seem like they're making any rational decisions so far. And that's, stemming from
I'm really glad that you brought up the committee's own words, right? Because they're not living by them, right? It's head-to-head. Then you go into record, eye test, and it feels like they're moving the goalposts. So
even common opponents.
Even common opponents, yes. And I just want to kind of get your guys' opinion on where, if you were on the committee, which would you value more, record or that eye test? Because there's some teams with a good record that just do not pass the eye test whatsoever, and some teams that are maybe behind in record, but most definitely pass the eye test.
I think the wins have to matter at the end of the day. I actually have been saying that BYU deserves to be a little bit higher than where they've been. I think they've been screwed over quite a bit by the committee, because if you had a one-loss SEC team, that team's in the top 5. But because their one loss was a top 5 team, they're being screwed over to the point that they need to win the Big 12 championship to even get in. Alabama's got 2 losses. They also have the worst loss out of any team in the top 12 in the entire country against FSU, a bad team, a team that didn't even get bowl eligible.
So are you saying that BYU is a better quality loss than the quality loss king in Notre Dame? Is that what you're trying to say?
I am actually saying that, yes. I think that, and I think quality losses is one of the worst ways that we even want to say anything. Wins have to matter at the end of the day. I understand BYU's best win is Utah, but they don't have that many losses, and they're in a power conference. I think they should be rewarded. And then between the Miami and Notre Dame argument, you put these 2 resumes side by side. They're very similar. I understand that Notre Dame's got the strength of schedule. They have the strength of record. They're not by far the common opponents. Miami's out, beaten the margins, I believe, 3 out of the 4 games.
Correct.
They have, and then obviously the one that matters the most, they played on the field. They won the game. I think at the end of the day, if you have these 2 side by side, there's no reason that Miami shouldn't be above them. But it's hard for them to course correct when you're this far into the season.
And Jayden, I think like a common excuse the committee makes is that it was week 1 they played, but it doesn't matter. It's week 1. Head to head is what matters, and the committee needs to honor their own words on that.
And I just want to expand further on what Jayden was saying. Let's look more closely at these 2 resumes side by side, because they are strikingly similar. Like you said, Notre Dame does have a slight edge in the granular stats when you look at strength of schedule. They have the number 42 ranked strength of schedule compared to Miami at number 44. In terms of strength of record, they're number 13. Miami's number 12. So they're literally right there. But then when it comes down to other stats, such as, like you said, common opponents, Miami is 3 for 4 in winning those games by a wider margin. In terms of record versus ranked opponents, Miami is 4-0. Notre Dame 2-2. That's been a common complaint as well by Miami fans. They've not beaten any good teams. They've scheduled only 2 really good ranked teams. They lost them at the beginning of the year, and since then they've had no other real test. Then, of course, like you said, the head-to-head. And then, in my opinion, I believe the head-to-head should take precedence and be the main factor that comes into play when you're talking about a body of work of any team. That should be the first thing, bar none. It should, like Josh Pate said, count tenfold over any other stat when these two teams have played on the field together in the same season. You need to look at that game film. That takes more priority over anything else, because if not, why even play the game in the first place? Why even have these two teams scheduled on the field? And if I believe the committee goes with Notre Dame instead of Miami, it could have some disastrous implications on what the future of college football could look like due to the scheduling outcome of what could happen. We've already seen it start to take shape with Alabama. Just yesterday, they announced they scrapped their series with South Florida, I believe, in replacement for Marshall and Chattanooga. And that's what the reality is going to be now. These tough out-of-conference college football scheduling games are just not going to happen if the committee offers no incentive for scheduling them. And I believe it could be disastrous, and there needs to be more consistency. And I just also want to go back to the argument we had before talking about Florida State and Alabama, because that was the whole conflict of most deserving versus better team. And I will level with you guys right now. I do believe if Notre Dame and Miami were to play on a neutral field, I believe Notre Dame would win. But this is not a case of a better team versus most deserving where better team went out in Alabama versus Florida State, because unlike that situation, these two teams actually played against one another. And so that should be the number one driving factor of this decision, in my opinion.
And I think that even when you go into that better team versus more deserving argument, we could talk about Notre Dame looking like a better side, right? But if you look at who they've played during the stretch, 2-10 Purdue, 2-10 Arkansas, 2-10 Boston College, 4-8 Stanford, 7-5 NC State. They have some good wins against a 9-3 USC team, a Navy side, a Pitt side, and a Boise State side. But people look at their most dramatic win, per se, in that Syracuse game where they put up 70. That's great and all. You played against a lacrosse player as your starting quarterback, backups throughout, and Fran Brown, he's Fran Brown. Let's not even get into that.
And Pat Narduzzi, who said he'd like to lose by 100 points.
Exactly.
Yep.
Right? And you could say, wow, they've looked consistent, but what does that really mean? You're looking consistent against bad teams. That really doesn't hold that much weight. I do believe Notre Dame is a good team. I think they're actually a playoff-worthy team. But to say that they would come in and beat Miami, who's played against probably better sides, and obviously beat them head-to-head, we keep repeating that. Zach, you say that. Liam, you say it. Jayden, you say that. Everyone says that because that's what should matter. You played head-to-head. Week 1 should matter, and it's going to set such a bad precedent if it's not respected.
And I kind of have a question here. Do you think the solution to this is putting Notre Dame in a conference?
I think that would have been a solution needed a long time ago. I think Notre Dame should be in a conference. They're in the ACC for every single other sport, right?
I think so, yeah.
But they're not in a conference because they have a TV deal and it's money. College football is a business. You see it with the NIL side. You see it with the portal. College football is a business, and I don't think that Notre Dame is going to let itself be forced into a conference. But it would pretty much be the simple way, because you see Notre Dame fans, pundits backing Notre Dame saying, oh, well, if they were in the ACC, they would have just gone straight through the conference, been in the championship, and just been straight in that way. That's great. Amazing hypothetical. Why don't we do that in reality? Oh, wait, in reality, they came down to Coral Gate, to South Florida, week 1, and got demolished for 3 quarters. We let them back a bit in at the end, right? But they were being bullied. People went into that game expecting Miami to kind of just get a bit pushed over in a sense. Miami came out there and punched the bully. And it's so sad that it's not being respected. And if they were in a conference and had to face a Power 4 level schedule week in and week out, I don't think that we're having this conversation right now.
Yeah, I do want to. I think I agree, but I will say that this might be the first year that Notre Dame being an independent might actually hurt them. If BYU were to win this game and Alabama doesn't lose by 50 or Ty Simpson doesn't get hurt, Alabama gets in, BYU gets in, Notre Dame's left out, and they can't really say anything about that when their best win is USC. And then on the other side, in terms of, for you were mentioning, Liam, where we're talking about if Miami were to not get in over Notre Dame, what it would set a precedent for. I agree, although the SEC has a new format where they have the 9 conference games and they're required to do one out-of-conference Power 4 game, which is a positive, I would say. But I agree that you're going to start seeing these premier Week 1 matchups that everyone wants to watch. You're going to see less and less of them because if you're telling me that Week 1 doesn't matter, if you're telling me that Miami versus Notre Dame didn't matter or Alabama versus FSU didn't matter, then why would I play that game? And I mean, you're kind of seeing that when Miami just scheduled their matchup with Notre Dame on November 7th next year, a game that is not in August. They're kind of maybe seeing, hey, if you play it later in the year, that's maybe a different kind of scenario of what team is more deserving, or is that a bigger win because of when the game was played?
And if Miami does lose out on that last spot to Notre Dame, boy, that would be the ultimate bulletin board material going into South Bend on November 7th. That would be, I think, maybe the most watched game of the entire year next season, discounting all SEC games that are of any importance, because that's just going to be absolute cinema. But I just want to put myself into maybe the shoes of the Notre Dame fan right now, because their line of thinking into why they deserve to be in the playoffs is probably that they have the better power ranking, the computer favors them, the metrics, and all these odds say that, hey, Notre Dame is the better favorite to win the national championship right now than Miami. Well, here's the thing. That's all speculative stuff. This is all prospective stats that, in my opinion, should not come into play unless these two teams have played on the field against one another. And I know I keep beating the dead horse about how the head-to-head should matter, and I really do believe it does. But you can't put into these futuristic stats unless these two teams haven't played against one another. That's when you can start factoring in all that stuff about the percentages and odds of winning the national championship. Because if these two teams haven't played against one another, then yeah, you have no baseline. But because they did, that's when that stuff shouldn't even matter. And that's when all the prospective projections and stuff that's not how rankings work. Rankings go on a week-by-week basis based on what the current teams have done at that point, not what you expect them to do. And that's where I believe that there's been an error.
That's the reason why we went away from the BCS, right? The amount of controversy it created, because pretty much the fate of college football being decided by computers, and computers, they're great and all, but there's something about the human aspect of just obviously playing against one another and being able to see that with your eyes as a committee. And again, that's why we went away from it. Computers aren't everything. I love analytics. I love it all. But when there's a head-to-head, you don't need the analytics. They played, and even when you look at the analytics, you're pretty much splitting hairs between the teams. It's something that's I understand the Notre Dame fan backing their corner, right? I mean, you should see my Twitter replies anytime I tweet anything about Notre Dame. They're out in full force. Every team's out in full force. You have Mario Cristobal doing a media tour on different shows and podcasts, kind of campaigning for the Hurricanes, right? We got to get him on here one time. You know what I mean? But that's basically what it's becoming. It's becoming a circus at the end. It's just kind of sad to see.
Seeing coaches and teams and ADs having to make their case to the committee
and governors.
Governors. You have, it's a joke. It's an absolute joke that this is where college football is at. It's the best sport in the world and the worst sport in the world for those entire reasons. But I understand the Notre Dame aspect. I actually think Notre Dame is a playoff team. They've kind of been screwed over by the SEC teams that are above them. Oklahoma, like we talked about. Ole Miss without Lane Kiffin and half their offensive staff. Oregon, who hasn't really had a very huge game. It feels like Notre Dame is getting screwed over, but unfortunately, when you have to debate between Notre Dame and Miami specifically, you have to give Miami that edge because of the head-to-head. And if the committee doesn't, it sets a bad precedent. I don't think they will. So it's just where we are right now in college sports.
Just coming back a little bit, talking about campaigning for the Hurricanes to make it to the college football playoff. You have the Duke Blue Devils head coach, Manny Diaz, former head coach of the Miami Hurricanes, wanting Miami. He thinks Miami deserves to make the college football playoff, while his own team has a potential spot on the line for the college football playoffs themselves if they maybe win the ACC championship. We'll see what happens there, and I think that's just that shows something, and the committee should realize that.
And I think that's a great segue, Zach, because now I kind of want to shift our attention to Saturday's games. And one of the bigger storylines is that Duke versus Virginia in the ACC championship. That's a completely different storyline that we could talk about as well. Miami getting snubbed out of the ACC championship to a 5-loss Duke team. That's just the current protocols right now for how the ACC sets up their tiebreakers. Miami lost in a 5-way tie between them and a plethora of other teams. Very sad considering that Miami is 10-2 and the just absolutely pacing all the other ACC teams right now in favorites for the college football playoff, yet they are omitted from the ACC championship entirely. But there's, in my opinion, 3 games that the Canes fans need to pay attention to heading into this weekend. Not all of equal importance. I think that there are some that will be more impactful than others. Obviously, number 1 is BYU versus Texas Tech, because that is the end-all, be-all. If BYU wins, it's over. If BYU loses, there's still a chance. And now here's where I think there's a little bit of a question. Which game behind that is more important? Is it going to be Bama versus Georgia? Because if Bama loses, would they then go down to number 10, further separating Notre Dame and Miami? Or would it be Duke versus Virginia? Because there's another argument where if Duke wins, there's no shot that they are be making the college football playoff over 2 group of 5 teams that will then qualify ahead of them. So that means that Miami could have the opportunity of being the only ACC representative. And then if Virginia wins, it will look worse for Miami's case because then you already do have an ACC team in there. So in your guys' opinion, which game is more important, Bama, Georgia, or Duke versus Virginia for Miami's playoff hopes?
I mean, I'd also throw in the group of 5 games with JMU, right? Because let's say Duke wins. If JMU wins, it would be them, right?
Yep.
But if JMU doesn't win, Duke would probably slide in, I believe.
Would you have Duke in over the winner of BYU or over Boise State / UNLV?
Oof, though that's also there's a lot of games that are.
This is a
crucial.
5-loss Duke team with losses to Tulane, UConn, Illinois.
Boat race by Illinois.
Yeah, I think we should be honestly. Duke would be the team I think you should want Duke to win, and I think that should be your higher priority because
Duke unlocks the chaos scenario.
Yeah,
the doomsday scenario.
It would be kind of cool to see, especially let's say we're all in the mindset of Miami not making it. That's not something that we can control. As fans, as spectators, as media, I want to see the chaos.
Absolutely.
Right? You've already made it a circus show. Let the circus be a circus and have all this chaos that they're going to have to sort through. It would be incredible to see if Duke wins.
Yeah, I have a little bit of bias to Duke. My brother obviously works there. My brother works there for Duke football, but I think agree. I want chaos. I want as much chaos as possible. And I do think there is some sort of human aspect where you have these 12 guys in a room and you're debating it and you're saying Duke wins and there's no ACC representative. You're saying, wow, there's no ACC representative. That's a huge problem. That sets maybe a precedent or just sets something in the future to say, hey, there's 3 of the 4 Power 4 conference. One of them is not represented. Not represented by 2 group of 5s that take over. That causes a problem, and I think having Miami in maybe changes that human element.
So yeah, to kind of just we kind of just got off track a bit there. We were a bit fun with the chaos, but yeah, we think that probably Duke Virginia is going to be the more important game because they've already set the scene with Bama that even if they lose that game, they're still going to be in. So that's a spot that's taken no matter what. And these games, whether it's Duke Virginia, Group of 5 games, that unlock so much. There's so many more dominoes that fall. I think those games, especially the Duke Virginia game, is going to be the most consequential matchup of the year.
Absolutely, I think they did. I think they purposely set up Alabama moving up this week so that there's not really a world where Alabama can drop out of the CFP. And one of the topics that we had been talking about I guess knocking teams for even playing that 13th game. It says some sort of precedent for sure if Alabama were to lose to Georgia and not fall, but if BYU were to lose to Texas Tech and they were to fall, it sets some sort of precedent again with the Big Ten and SEC kind of bias, and you have the Big 12 and ACC kind of being like, you're straight up not letting us, get represented, or you're kind of, we're playing by a different set of rules essentially, and that's a the committee has put themselves in a really tough situation that no matter what decision they'll make, I don't know if they'll be able to get out scot-free with precedence over the next few years.
Well, BYU Texas Tech, obviously the most important game of that entire slate, does kick off as one of the first games on that Saturday at 12. Judgment Day for the Miami Hurricanes comes at 12, the next day after that on Sunday. So it is all coming to a fiery conclusion. And boy, whatever happens, what we can expect is, like we guys all established, chaos. No matter which fan base ends up winning, which fan base ends up getting left out, if there's one certainty in college football is that 50% are not going to be happy. And so this is all boiling down to what's going to be an epic conclusion in the college football race. And we can all just strap in because right now Miami has no control whatsoever about what is about to happen. It is all out of their hands. And that is a scary place to be, but that is just the reality. So with that, that'll conclude this episode of the TMH Sportscast. Thank you guys so much for coming on. This was a great dialogue and, unfortunately, a very real one because we got brutally honest, and I think it was very necessary.
Yeah, man, we should really be focusing on, booking our plane tickets to the first round. We should be here breaking down the recruiting class that just signed today on Wednesday when we record this is National Signing Day. We signed 30 commits, landed all the guys, flipped one from Louisville, Carson Bush, and that's what we should be focusing on. But we're here kind of just breaking down the circus that is the CFB committee. But, I mean, I'm a college football fan. I can't say I'm not going to be watching this Saturday. And I'm really appreciative of you guys having us on here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys very much. There's nothing like college football. Let's just say that.
It's going to be a good weekend. Perfect.
Of course. Thank you so much. Until next time.